Hello and welcome everybody to the Sophos Firewall Academy for Sophos Firewall version 18.5. My name is Ed Korsgaard and I will be delivering today's session. I am so glad that everyone can be here with us today as we are going to cover the XGS series hardware and then central firewall management and reporting for the XG firewall. So please note that this is the first of 3 sessions and we hope that everybody will be able to attend all 3 sessions. In today's session, we're going to take a look at the new XGS series hardware that was designed to take full advantage of the XG Firewall OS. We're then going to look at Sophos Central and how it's going to be able to help you manage Sophos Firewall as well as provide a centralized reporting solution. So very exciting. Let's get right into it. And we need to start with the Sophos XG Firewall because, as we've said and as we know, it's undergoing a bit of a redesign. And part of that is its name. We are removing the XG from the name, and it is now just the Sophos Firewall. So what do we mean by this? The Sophos XG Firewall is now just Sophos Firewall, no matter what platform it is deployed on. However, the hardware is a different story. We're introducing a new XGS series of hardware for the Sophos Firewall, but keeping the existing hardware line being the XG series line, and it will retain the name XG. The underlying operating system that runs on all of the platforms, be it the XG hardware, the XGS hardware, or even virtual or cloud devices, this underlying operating system is called SFOS, or the Sophos Firewall Operating System. And the device as a whole, the platform plus the operating system, will be referred to as Sophos Firewall. So now that we've mentioned it, let's take a look at this new hardware and what makes it so amazing. The XGS series hardware for Sophos Firewall is going to be able to provide better performance and protection. It has an intelligent and more efficient traffic handling that's going to be able to free up resources for intensive tasks, such as TLS inspection. This is possible thanks to the new dual processor architecture, which pairs a multi-core CPU with a dedicated extreme flow processor for hardware acceleration. The XGS series also includes a wide range of built-in connectivity options as well as many add-on connectivity options. And this gives the new XGS series hardware the flexibility to adapt to most environments. So let's dig into this new hardware a little bit more now. Each XGS series unit contains both a 64-bit CPU with its own system memory, as well as the Extreme Flow Processor, which is also known as a Network Processing Unit or NPU. This NPU has its own memory. In addition to the fixed network ports, which increase in number with the unit's models, there are optional modules that provide flexible options for expanding the network port selection. The XGS series also includes support for PoE ports, supporting both the 802.3 AD and the 802.3 AT specification, and fail to wire, which can allow traffic to pass through the unit if power is lost. The fail to wire and the PoE can be available both onboard and with additional modules depending on the model of XGS hardware. So let's talk a little bit more about this, and we're going to start by talking about this fast path and the extreme flow processor. So in the XG series, we used a virtual fast path that was processed only by the CPU. This extreme flow processor didn't exist originally. Now our new XGS series hardware includes this extreme flow processor that sits between the physical ports and the CPU with a PCIe interconnect between them. The extreme flow processor is going to be able to handle the traffic that is offloaded to the fast path and reducing the load on the CPU so that the CPU can focus on other tasks that cannot be offloaded. So let's take a look at what the packet flow would look like with the extreme flow processor in the new XGS hardware. So the initial packets of a connection will always flow through the slow path. And they may also flow through other security modules such as IPS in this example. This will always occur when a new connection is initiated to the Sophos firewall. Now, once the slow path has gathered enough information about the connection, it can program the fast path with the state information using an API. This state information includes basic packet filtering rules, natting rules, and other information that remains static for the life of the connection. So, once this is done, and the slow path has done its initial investigation and passed the information onto the fast path, then the packets are now flowing through the fast path, bypassing the slow path, but are actually still going through IPS, as we don't fully trust the connection yet. The IPS is going to require more investigation before it can make a decision. But already, the connection has been sped up. So we're already seeing a benefit in the speed of the firewall. But there's more that can still be done. So once the IPS has enough information about the connection, it can then update the connection verdict in the slow path through an API, and then the slow path can update the fast path with this new information. Now, this will only occur if we are confident that the connection does not contain any malicious content. And the end result will be with the slow path and the IPS offloaded, the packets will be able to fully flow through the fast path at near wire speeds. Now, it is also possible for the fast path to actually hand the connection back to the slow path if the connection falls outside of some predefined boundaries. This can happen if, say, firewall rules have changed and they need to be re-evaluated by the slow path. So this is going to allow the slow path to gather more information about the connection, and it can then choose to offload that back to the fast path again if everything looks good. So, how can we check and see if the fast path is actually doing anything? It is possible to check if traffic is being offloaded to the fast path on an XGS series device. We would normally start by checking to see if firewall acceleration is enabled, and this is done from the console with the command system firewall-acceleration show, and we can see an example of it being done here. The command is written on the screen in orange, and we can see the result of that command with acceleration is enabled in configuration and acceleration is loaded, telling us that the fast path is running and active. We can also use the same system firewall-acceleration command to enable or disable the fast path. So we now know that our acceleration is enabled and turned on. So maybe we want to see if a specific connection is being offloaded to the fast path. This can often be done if we are troubleshooting a problem we suspect that fast path may be part of the issue. We can use contrack on the advanced shell of the Sophos firewall to check a connection and see if that connection is being offloaded to the fast path. So this is done by first running the contract command with the -L switch, and this is going to load the connection tracking table from the firewall and display it on the screen. So we can see at the top of this slide in orange, contract -L is being run, and we can see the output of a connection here, an example connection. What we're looking for is to see if the connection has a fastpath ID. So in the bottom left corner, we can see this con FP ID. If the connection has a con FP ID, then it has been offloaded to the fastpath. If this connection has not been offloaded to the fastpath, then instead of con FP ID, it will say not underscore offloaded. Additionally, a more global view we can look at is we can see the fastpath offload. So another way to see this data is to review the counters that show us how many packets are being offloaded. This again is done from the advanced shell using the command usfp underscore table underscore print dot sh space worker underscore sys underscore cnt. So in the list that is shown here, we can see the command being run at the top, again in orange. Then in this list that is being shown, we are looking for wire to wire. All right, you can see it highlighted in orange here, and we can see now how much traffic is being fully offloaded to the fastpath. Once we see that our fastpath is actually running, it's loaded, we see traffic going through it, we know how to see if a specific connection is being offloaded. There's a little more to look at and to know about this. So two important items that we want to make sure you're aware of when it comes to fastpath. The first is if we do a TCP dump, here we're doing a TCP dump of Proto 1, the traffic will not be offloaded to the fastpath. So when you do a TCP dump, we stop offloading traffic to the fastpath so that we can provide full visibility into the traffic in order for TCP dump to operate properly. The second thing to be aware of is that physical ports are connected to the extreme flow processor, which is then connected to the CPU via PCIe. And because of this, these ports show up as virtual interfaces. So in this TCP dump example that we can see here on the screen, we can see that the traffic is going through the virtual port and then through the hardware connection, finally to the extreme flow processor. So you will see these virtual interfaces, and this is intended. So some good notes about fastpath, keep them in mind. I'm going to switch gears a little bit here now, and we're going to talk a little bit about the fail to wire feature of the XGS. So the Sophos XGS hardware does feature a fail to wire, which is a fault tolerance feature that protects your essential business communications in the event of a power outage. The WAN 1 and LAN 1 ports will be bridged together when power is lost, and this will allow us to transparently protect our network connectivity. The relay creates a physical connection between the two ports in the bypass pair and then passes the traffic over this bypass pair, over this relay. And because it is a physical connection, that means it works whether or not there is power in the box. We would normally use fail to wire in, say, bridge mode deployments or inline deployments, normally in deployments where the XGS is not the primary edge device, but is instead deployed behind an existing edge firewall. Do note that the fail to wire is not enabled by default. It is something that you have to turn on, and it is configured via the advanced shell using the XGS-FTW for fail to wire command. Here at the bottom of the screen, we can see some examples of the syntax associated with the XGS-FTW command and some switches that are very useful for enabling and disabling the fail to wire. All right, so we've talked a little bit about fastpath, we've talked about fail to wire, and these are items that are available on all of the new XGS hardware. But now let's take a look at the XGS models, and we're going to drill into some specifics for each of the different XGS series models. All right. So when we talk about the XGS series, they come in 5 different variants, the first of which are the desktop models. There are 2 variants in the desktop models, and basically they are ones with built-in wireless and ones without built-in wireless. Next, we have our 1U server rack models. These can be either short or long devices for our racks. And finally, we have our 2U server rack models, and these only come in 1 length. So let's go into a little more detail on each of the different models in the series. So we're going to start with the XGS desktop models. The XGS desktop models are available both with and without wireless built in, and they all come with a single power supply. All the desktop models, except for the base XGS 87, have the option to plug in a second power supply, which can honestly be added at any time. The power supplies for the desktop models are all external units. There's also an optional user-replaceable 3G or 4G LTE module available for the desktop XGS series units, starting with the XGS 116. Additionally, the wireless desktop models all have a single 802.11 A, B, G, and AC dual band radio. As there's only a single radio, these can only broadcast on the 2.4 or 5 GHz, but not both simultaneous. Because of this, the XGS 116W, 126W, and 136W also have the option to add a second wireless module that is 802.11 N and AC dual band. This addition allows the device to broadcast on both the 2.4 and 5 GHz bands simultaneous and will provide better coverage. Moving on to the XGS 1Us. The XGS series 1U devices all include an Ethernet management port that allows you to connect to the web admin on HTTPS 10.0.1.1 and on port 4444, of course. All 1U devices have an optional external PSU that can be mounted on the back of the unit so that it doesn't take up additional rack space. That is, except for the XGS 4500, which has an optional internal hot swappable power supply unit. All of the XGS 1U devices also include either 1 or 2 FlexiPort bays, depending on the model, as can be seen in the chart here. If we look at the XGS 2Us, the largest XGS Series 2U units, the 5500 and the 6500, both include hardware RAID storage, 2 FlexiPort bays, and 2 internal hot swappable power supplies. These units also include 1 or 2 NIC expansion bays that can be used to add a module that has both 4 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports and 12 gigabit Ethernet ports per bay. And for how many they support, again, please see the chart shown on the slide. Now, in the 1Us and 2Us, we have support for the FlexiPort expansion modules. So here we can see the FlexiPort expansion modules that are available for the 1U and 2U models. Now, please note, in the bottom right corner, you'll note that the 4-port 2.5 gigabit Ethernet PoE module is only available specifically for the 1U XGS models. That being said, there are 3 other FlexiPort modules that are not shown here that are only available for 2U devices. These include an 8-port 10 gigabit Ethernet SFP+, a 2-port 10 gigabit Ethernet fiber LC bypass with a 4-port 10 gigabit Ethernet SFP+, and finally a 2-port 40 gigabit Ethernet QSFP+. Additionally, for all the models, there is a VDSL SFP module that is available that will allow you to connect a DSL modem via SFP. And as a side note, FlexiPort modules are not hot swappable and do require that the device be powered off to install. So please do not try to install SFPs while your XGS unit is running. All right. So that covers all of the major updates in the XGS series hardware. So now we're going to switch over and take a look at central firewall management and reporting. So Sophos Central is our cloud management platform, and we're going to take a look at some features that can make managing your firewalls easier when you have many of them to deal with, or maybe if they are remotely located and you don't want to have to go on site to do everything. So we're going to jump into Sophos Central here and have a look at these great new features. So here I am in Sophos Central in my dashboard, and I'm going to start by navigating to Firewall Management in the left-hand menu, and then we're going to start by taking a look at the Firewalls menu item. So here in the Firewalls menu item, I can see that I have a number of groups. Being able to group firewalls makes management easier for administrators when they have many devices to deal with. Also, grouping firewalls does have some additional benefits in Sophos Central. So if I were to create a new group, I need to give my new group a name. Right? And the first thing that we can see is that when we create a new group, we have two radio buttons, one that says use Sophos default and one that allows us to import an existing configuration. All right. This allows me to copy a configuration to create a configuration template, I should say, from an existing firewall to apply to this group. And as the text above mentions, I can customize this later. So in this example, I'm creating a firewall group called XG Firewall Academy. I'm going to import an existing configuration from a firewall called lun-gw1.sophos.www. When I click the Save button, it will create my group, and then it will begin importing the configuration and applying it to the group. This will take a while, so we're going to move on while it does its thing. Another feature that's really nice here in Sophos Central is the dynamic objects. We can now create dynamic objects in Central Firewall Management that's going to make it possible to create configurations that are able to work across devices where there is variation on how they are set up. Note that we can create dynamic objects for zones as well as for interfaces, right? So for zones and for interfaces. So let's go ahead and take a look at creating an example. So I'm going to create a dynamic zone. I'm going to call this storage, and we'll say where we store things. This zone type is going to be a LAN zone. All right. And what's going to happen is the default here, we can see at the bottom. All right. The default is going to be all the firewalls that have a zone called storage. All right. So in this example here, we're creating a dynamic zone called storage, and by default, it's going to map to a zone called storage. But maybe we have a location that doesn't use the zone called storage. The firewall maybe was created earlier. Maybe it was the first one we deployed, or maybe it was an organization that we joined with, we merged with. What I can do is I can select a different firewall. So for example, I can select this NYGW, the New York Gateway at sophos.www. And I can say, instead of storage, we called this one warehouse. And I can add this. So for all my other firewalls, this zone will map to a zone called storage, except for NYGW, which it's going to map to warehouse. And I can save this guy. And now I can see I have this storage zone in my dynamic zones. If I click on it, you'll see the name gets grayed out, but I can still modify any of the firewalls and zones that it maps to. All right. So where do we use this? Well, we normally apply this to a group of firewalls. So if I come back to my firewalls on the left, I've got my groups. We can see that we're still importing our configuration. That does take a few minutes. All right, but I can modify a group. So I'm going to go ahead and on the UK group, click the ellipsis on the right, and I am going to choose to manage its policy. So when I manage the policy, if you look down the left-hand menu, you can see we are now managing this firewall and all the different parts of the firewall. Well, in this case, the group of firewalls. But I'm interested in the rules and policies for my dynamic group, and I have a pre-created rule here called LAN to DMZ. So what I can do is in the LAN zones, if I add a new item, I could change LAN or add to it, and I could choose my storage dynamic object. This storage dynamic object will then be able to map either the storage LAN or, in New York's example, the warehouse LAN whenever the rule applies. So very useful for firewalls that might have some slightly different configuration. An additional feature of groups is when I click the ellipsis, again, we have our menu, there is a feature called firmware upgrades. All right, in this firmware upgrades, when I select it, what it's going to do is it's going to take a look at all of the firewalls in the group and see if any of them need firmwares. Now, all of mine are up to date, so I just happen to have a nice little slide that we can look at that would show when a firmware is available, what we can do. So the firmware updates can be applied to groups of firewalls. All firewalls in the group that need a firmware update will be displayed. And in the list, we can select the ones that we want to update. And the updates can be applied immediately, or they can be based on a schedule, as can be seen here. If you choose immediately, or if you base it on a schedule, at the appropriate time, the firewalls will begin to update. Back to Sophos Central with us. If we want to unlock more features in Central Firewall reporting, we need to have a CFR Advanced license in our Central account. What exactly does this do? If I take a look at the report generator, you might note that there are a number of tabs across the top, the saved templates, the scheduled reports, and the queued, all right, that are not available to me. They are considered locked. Additionally, if I come back to my groups and I select the ellipsis next to a group and I try to view a group's reports, I'm going to get an error in the bottom right that tells me that multi-device reporting is only available with the advanced license. All right, so what do we do with this? Well, I am going to come up to my name here, Central Demo Admin, and I am going to go to the licensing page. Here at the licensing page, we'll see that I have Central Firewall Reporting, and there is a little Manage link just to the right of it. If I select this Manage link, I will see all of my firewalls that are part of this Sophos Central account. And I may notice a couple of different things here. First off, at the very top, I have how many licenses are used. And it's very important to note that one license equals 100 gigabytes of data. I can see when my licenses expire. And then in my list of firewalls, I have a section called Allocate Licenses. Allocate licenses. So right now I have 2 firewalls online. So I'm going to allocate some licenses to one of these firewalls. Now, one thing that's very important to note is there is a column called Central Storage Used. This is how many gigabytes of data that firewall needs. All of my firewalls are virtual firewalls, and they are all configured with 300 gigs, or 289 really, of storage requirement. So it is actually going to require me to add 3 licenses to one of these firewalls. So I do happen to have 3 licenses, as can be seen up here. So I'm just going to go ahead and take the first one. I'm going to click the plus sign. You can see it's going to allocate 3 licenses. And then I'm going to click save. It's going to give me, of course, the confirmation. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes, I'm sure. And we give it a couple of seconds here to do its thing. So now I can see I've allocated 3 licenses to this firewall. All right. I can see the tier. There's a column called tier, and the tier column now says advanced. And I can see also up top that my 3 of 3 licenses are being used. Now, a couple of notes while we're still on this page. This firewall that has the licenses applied, that has the tier advanced, I can click the ellipsis on the far right, and there's a couple of important things worth noting here. First off, I can associate the licenses and data with a replacement device. So if I have to replace the device, I can move the licenses to this new device and not lose the data that's stored in Sophos Central. I also have the option to reclaim the licenses. If I reclaim the licenses, I'll get my licenses back, the data will be removed, and this firewall will fall out of the advanced tier and go back to basic reporting licensing. All right, from here I can also view this specific device's reports, as well as delete the log data and unregister this device from Sophos Central. I would do the last item here if I am done with the device and retiring it permanently, or retiring it from this environment. So what does this give us? Once we've applied the licenses to the device, all right, we can go back to our firewalls menu. And what we'll see is that we had our groups, right? We have our groups. In this case, each one actually only has one firewall in it at the moment. But next to the groups, I had the ability to view a group's reports. So if I view a group's reports now, I'll actually be able to pull a report that's aggregated for all of the firewalls in that group that have an advanced license applied to them. All right, so I can start reporting on multiple firewalls that are in a single group. Here in the report hub, I have a drop-down list, and you may note that the UK, for example, doesn't have a checkbox like the US above it does. And all of the firewalls below it are single select firewalls. If I try to click on one of them, it's not letting me. If I uncheck the US, then I can select one of these firewalls and apply it to get the reports. Inside the US, I will see any firewalls that have an advanced license, and they have checkboxes, so I can select multiple of them in order to report on them. So that is how you would select which firewalls you want to see the reports for. Additionally, we mentioned earlier the report generator and a number of tabs across the top that were not available to me, right? I had the save templates, the scheduled exports, and this queue. So they are now unlocked. So let's take a look at the first report generator. So in the report generator, this is where I can run a report. I have some various options for what firewall. Again, if I have firewalls with CFR advanced licenses, I can select multiple of them and then see the report being shown here. What this allows me to do then, so let's say I want to run a report for 24 hours on the US firewall for bandwidth usage, because we have some good data here. Once I've made some options, I can click the button for Save Template in the right side. and I can give it a name. Now you may note there is a little slider here. So I can create report templates, and I can optionally configure automatic scheduling of exporting of this report. And you can see daily, weekly, monthly in PDF, CSV, or HTML. And depending on my frequency, I can, of course, select some different options, right? Additionally, I can give notification that it was exported and delivered. So I can send it as a link in an email or send it as an email attachment, right? And whether or not I want to send this just to myself or to all the admins, or pick and choose my admins in my central enterprise. So in this case, I'm going to choose just to send it to myself, and I can click Save. So now if I come over to the Saved Templates tab, I've got my US bandwidth report for 18.5. I can see it's here. It's weekly. All right. It was created by me, the central demo admin, and I have some actions I can take on the far right, such as opening the report and or updating, editing the features of this saved template. Additionally, the Scheduled Exports tab stores any exported reports and makes them available for download, and it will store these exported reports for 90 days. Here also is kind of a log of any reports that have exported and if any have, for example, failed. So I can see I have one report that did not generate properly, and a number of reports that did export just fine. And finally, the Queue tab is for any reports that are taking a long time to generate. If the report takes a while, you can come to the Queue tab and it will list here while it is generating that report and preparing to send. So with that, we've seen some of the nice new features that can be found here inside of Sophos Central within the firewall management. And kick back out, I want to thank everybody for joining me now. And now I'm going to hand back control to the team to take any questions that you all may have. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of the day.